For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It for Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It for Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. Really excited to be here with my friend Jim Babka today. Jim, welcome to the show.
Not as excited as I am. Looking forward to this.
I've been on Jim's podcast. We did a multi-part series together. Yes. That was really fun on Gracearchy with Jim Babka. He's the host of that. Go check that out. He's also the president of Downsize DC. Today, he's joining us as the social strategist for the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity. And we're going to get into some concepts that we have not talked about here on the podcast today. Some of the kind of bigger picture things that are at play. And Jim just has a really interesting perspective on this on behalf of the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity. And we want to get into that because it's important to think about why we do some of the things that we do, not just which policy is good or bad. Like, how do we determine if it's good or bad? How do we think about what might work best? So we're going to dive into kind of those bigger pictures and then how that influences drug policy. So before we dive into that, let me remind you, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on upcoming episodes. If you haven't checked out my book, Curious, encourage you to do that. You can often get it for free on Amazon, or you can go buy it because 75% of the proceeds of a purchase of Curious go right back to End It for Good and support the work. So it's a good cause. It's a worthy cause, if I do say so myself.
It's a great book. We spent a lot of time talking about it when you were on Gracearchy. So
that's true. We did. We really dived in deep. It's really fun. So, Jim, tell us kind of how did you get into this type of work? Why are you passionate about this? You work beyond drug policy, but why are you passionate about the perspective with which people come to a policy question and why they think about coercion and why it matters whether we think about whether or not we can tell someone else what to do and try to force them to do it? Like, why is this something that you have spent a portion of your life working on?
Well, did you ever watch the show The Jetsons?
Yeah, I wanted to, Jim. That was back in the day where I got to watch like two things. I was growing up homeschooled, Jim. This is not anything. My husband says
you're familiar with the concept, right?
I'm familiar with the concept, but if you ask me any like pop culture reference, unless it was related to boy bands in the 1990s, I will not know what you're talking about. But yes, I'm familiar with the concept.
They had flying cars, and George Jetson was just born a couple of years ago, actually, in real life. Like the character George Jetson, his birthday was just a couple of years ago. I want to know where the flying cars are. I want to know. I believe that every time we interfere with people's happiness, harmony, and prosperity, we diminish a lot of things. We diminish all of our ability to be at peace, to be maximally profitable and flourish in our lives. I believe that there's so many good things that would happen if people were able to pursue their own happiness. Almost every time someone comes along and suggests that if we just solve this little social problem and we just focus on a handful of people who have this problem, by taking something away, we can ignore all the other people, the thousands, the tens of thousands, the millions of people who will see their happiness, harmony, and prosperity decline. And when they lose those things, we all lose. And so really, it's about having a better world. Now, I'm personally motivated because I'm a person of faith. I do a show called Gracearchy with Jim Babka because to me, my values that you would typically call political values, I have basically sought to try to harmonize those in the best way possible with what it is I believe. And this has been a journey that I've been on since, well, in some ways since high school, but more precisely since about 1996. And I've been working full time either in some kind of political cause or more, most of this century, it's been first in policy, trying to lobby to change things, and more lately, because I've been blessed to move into kind of the high level philosophy of this whole thing. What is it that we should be talking about? What is the underlying reality we should be discussing?
You're making yourself sound really old by saying in this century you've been working on XYZ versus the last century when you were working on it.
I've been full time doing some work like this since 1999. And if you would talk to my wife, she would say it was even before then. This is something I'm very, very passionate about about a set of ideas and trying to change the world, but more and more realizing we have to change ourselves and we have to have communities where we live that change.
So talk about this role for you as the social strategist for the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity. What is the foundation's core principle? I love it when people have very simple things that they can stand on. It's not like, here's my 50-point mission statement, whatever, that nobody's going to remember. So tell us what it is and tell us what that means.
It is called the natural principle of human respect. And it says that any time someone experiences coercion, theft, or violence, their happiness, harmony, and or prosperity will decline. Always. That's why it's a principle. So we say natural principle because we're saying it almost in the Isaac Newton type sense, right? Gravity, cause and effect. You let go of an object, it drops, it hits the ground. What I just described to you, that people's happiness, harmony, and prosperity will decline always when they experience coercion, theft, and violence, that's a cause and effect relationship. It's absolute. So we spent a lot of time debating theology and rights and a whole bunch of things trying to get at, how should we govern ourselves? How should we interact with strangers? How should we treat somebody on the other side of town? Where should we stick our nose? What things are or are not our business? And very few people have a very simple philosophy that boils down to, well, is it going to basically pick someone's pocket or break someone's leg? If you recognize that everyone is exploring and trying to figure out how to maximize their happiness, and that when they do that, on balance, great things happen, then you recognize that we have a principle by which we can govern ourselves, by which we can determine what is and is not our business, that tell us how to interact with our neighbors and with strangers. Obviously, if you're in relationship with somebody, if you're romantically engaged, if they're your children, if they're family members, if they're coworkers, there's a different set of rules for those situations that are much more intimate and profound. But how do we interact in society? Well, I would suggest that we don't violate that principle.
So it's an interesting way to think about it, and I think we have to think a little harder about it, because I think when most people, I would say myself, when I kind of first began hearing about this, the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh wait, we cannot let people pursue their happiness. They'll go hurt a bunch of other people. So that's the important second part of the principle that you just stated, which is you can pursue your own happiness. You cannot steal from other people to do that. You can't hurt other people to do that, because now you're impinging on their pursuit of happiness. So there's a way in which I think our experience of what it means to pursue your own happiness, most of us, the image that comes to mind is a pursuit that mows over other people's happiness, rather than everyone is has the freedom to pursue their own happiness within the boundaries of not taking away from other people's happiness.
Right. So I want to be clear. I do just as much stealing as I want to do. I do just as much murdering as I want to do. I go around and hit as many people as I very much want to do, which turns out to be precisely zero. I don't believe those are good things to do. And it's not really complicated or hard to figure out. This is how we normally interact with each other. And it's something we learned all the way back on the playground. So just to take it to an extreme point, think of somebody who's a hardened criminal. If they want to have any relationships whatsoever in their life, they have to leave aside their criminality in their day-to-day existence. You won't have friends very long if you're caught stealing from them or you're hurting them and injuring them. You'll lose those situations. Worse, if you think you can go around getting away with those kinds of behaviors, somebody's going to take you out. You're either going to end up in jail or prison, or someone's going to kick your butt. And you're going to have it coming when that moment happens. And so even people who are engaged in acts that we would both agree are violating of other human beings, they have to limit those activities. They can't really do them to the people that they want to have close relationships with. And so, but as a general rule, most people don't do these things at all. So let me throw out an example to you. This is one of my favorite ones. You're going to go to a restaurant. We've all had the experience of going to a restaurant. How many people have asked to have the waiter come out and meet them, interviewed them to find out what kind of quality, the chef, interview them to find out what kind of quality person that they are, find out what their background and history is, criminal records, so on and so forth, because you're worried you might get poisoned. We don't do that. We go in and we sit down in a restaurant. We never meet the people who prepare our food. We just assume on faith that everything's going to be okay. And this is our normal condition in our day-to-day existence. We go around expecting that no one wants to harm us. That trust, that's what makes society possible. Okay, if that makes society possible, what is the potential if we can loosen that? If we can make it so that it applies to every situation all the time? How many better things would happen if we didn't interfere with other people, if we didn't mistrust other people, if we knew that we could trust them, if we had a chance to experiment and explore and find out what really was possible there, and we allowed everyone else around us to pursue their happiness? What's possible?
Tell us what you think the world would look like, and then I want to bring it into the world of drug policy in particular, and why you think this world is playing out the way that it is based on the principle of human respect. But what do you think a world would look like where people are more embracing of this principle of human respect, and they're more open to not just pursuing their own happiness like all of us tend to be doing, but allowing other people to pursue happiness in the ways that they want to, as long as they don't impinge on anyone else?
So I brought up flying cars a moment ago, and I say that somewhat facetiously or just for fun, but in a way it's true. There's a whole host of things that we don't see. They don't end up manifesting. They never come into existence because the opportunity to make them somehow or other got choked in the cradle. It never got out of someone's head, or it never got beyond the thinking about or fantasizing about stage. Because of regulation, because of taxation, because of all the other bureaucratic interferences we have in our lives. I mean, the amount of time we have to spend every year filling out our tax forms, which has gotten easier in recent years with all the tools that we have, but it's still time away from other productive pursuits that have something to do with our happiness. And those things mean that great things won't happen. But the area that I personally have focused on has to do with the social harmony that we lose in politics. So we use the term politics, and everybody thinks this is a normal part of our existence and that we should be voting and participating in some way. And all of these things are natural and good. I mean, it's just the way things are. But they weren't always that way. And it isn't necessarily the way that we need to solve a social problem. And a better word for politics would be the conflict machine. That actually describes what's happening. So the conflict machine is a system where when we have to solve a social problem, we determine who has to lose. There have to be losers in this process. Someone's going to have to pay the bill. Someone is going to not get what they want, but we're going to spend a lot of time fighting over it. And people are noticing more and more as they're sitting around this during the worldwide sickness we recently had. They even notice within their own families the level of division and deepening, because you had to pick a side. It's almost like we're stuck in a prison gang situation, right? And if you don't pick one of the two sides, you're going to get eaten up. You got to be on a side. And what happens over time, unfortunately, is the morals and the mind get corrupted in this process, where people start wanting to taste the delicious tears of their enemies. That's how they come to view their neighbors who are in the other party. And they lose sight of all the principles and values that they actually got involved to try to address in the first place. They become more and more satiated with this. And we see that a lot of people have left social media, or they spend less time there, because the loudest voices are the people who've been most consumed by this type of passion. And they find the existence of it uncomfortable. All of this is a byproduct of saying, okay, we're going to solve a situation not by self-governing, not by applying the principle of human respect, not through voluntary cooperation and action. No, we're going to go lobby someone who's going to take stolen money from taxpayers, turn that money around and produce miracles. And to me, this is a misplacement of faith. You believe that somehow the politicians are going to solve these problems. The real relationships are built when people come together and figure out how to address needs. So in my own work here, we had a guy that came and said, I work with Habitat for Humanity, and he explained what this is like. So you could have a government program that's supplying housing to the homeless, but then here he was working with Habitat for Humanity, and he said when all the volunteers come to swing the hammers and help build the house, the person who's going to be in that house is also there that day working right alongside him, and they all get to know each other. And it adds meaning and value to the activity that you're engaged in. It's transformative for everyone involved. So we have chosen conflict when what we could be choosing is relationship. And that is one powerful way in which I think all of us would have stronger social muscles, a greater sense of satisfaction in life. It's an established fact. Stephen Post has done work on this, that people volunteering, that's one of the most dramatic ways you can increase your happiness. That community can be built this way instead of the division that exists in politics.
So bring that down to drug policy, because for a lot of us, we grew up in very black and white world related to drugs. Drugs are bad, don't do them, ban them all.
Me too. And by the way, full disclosure, I've never done any of them.
Okay, so
I'm
not be able to discuss drug use because neither of us have ever done any of them.
Yeah, so I think this is an important thing in your work, and I think it's one of the reasons you're a really good voice at this. I'm not ruling out that I would never, ever, world without end, try something for some reason, because there's been stuff with marijuana and health. There's been stuff with psychedelics and mental health. Yeah. I can understand why people would do these things, but I want to be clear. I'm coming to you, talking to somebody raised exactly in the same way, like it's absolutely out of the question. And I never did it. And I have very little interest in doing it. I don't want to alter my mind, so to speak, or I don't even want to lose the self-control that comes from being sober. So I've never been drunk. I've never smoked a joint. I've never dropped acid, never done any of this kind of stuff. But I recognize that, the drug war has certain other harms.
So let's get into that, and specifically tie that to this principle of human respect, and give us your perspective on that, of not just does it sort of pragmatically work or not work, but why is it that you think this principle is, if it was observed related to substance use, could actually solve a lot of different problems? Give us the nitty gritty on how you think that plays out in this world.
Well, I'll start off with a specific case example. And that is that there seems to be evidence that psychedelics, certain types of psychedelics, could be very, very helpful to veterans or other people who have experienced post-traumatic stress. And without going into all the details of this, let's just assume, for the sake of example, that some people can benefit. During the course of the government scheduling of these various drugs, the federal government scheduling these drugs, which they have no constitutional authority whatsoever to do, by the way. I just want to point out, if you understand the 9th and 10th Amendment, the federal government never had this power in the first place. And it was put into place largely to punish the opposition. Richard Nixon didn't want hippies and black people voting. He wanted to reduce their number. John Ehrlichman has confessed that this was a large part of how this happened. So You can see the conflict machine rearing its head in there, right? Trying to gain some kind of advantage. It's not enough that, we just have to keep winning. So, but going back to our veterans, there's a lot of evidence that this could be of help to them. Where has all the research been during the federal government scheduling regime? Where did it go? So when they got upset about Timothy Leary saying, coming out and saying, tune out, they began taking these drugs and scheduling them and taking them out of the public. Research was happening at that time. It came to a halt. And it didn't just happen here. Our government has actively exported its war on drugs to virtually every nation on the planet with which it has any relationship. And so it completely destroyed all that research. So how many people who could have benefited were told that trying to benefit was making them bad? How many people who said, no, you know what, I'm going to try anyway, ended up with criminal charges that negatively affected their lives in just so many ways, beyond what we could sit and list just in the few minutes that we have here? How many opportunities were lost? You remember we were talking about the flying car. Is it possible right now that with the use of psychedelics and 50 years worth of knowledge, almost 60 years worth of knowledge lost, we could have actually made a real impact and changed these lives? Even to this very hour as we're talking, there's a group of people who are trying to go through the legitimate means to get this done at a cost of, let's be honest here, close to $1 billion to pull this off, as if it was a major pharmaceutical effort. This is a gift to the world. This is a plant made by God, and somehow or other they have to go through this process to just make it so that it's legal to be used. And that's just, to me, that's just inherently wrong. We looked at this problem in completely the wrong way, and we lost out on an opportunity to have basically the drug equivalent of flying cars.
So that's a helpful explanation, because I think when we don't see what could have been possible, we tend to, my experience with drug policy is people only think of the downside. They don't think of potential upside or potential what could be gained by something. They think only, could it potentially harm someone? And if the answer is yes, then they say, great, well, we got to ban it. This is the way to go. And we don't think about what has happened to we've lost nearly 1 million people to overdose over the last, several decades. All of that human capital, all of that human potential, all of that knowledge that we could have had. All of us know incredible people in recovery. We lost 1 million potential people in that. There's all sorts of giftings, all sorts of opportunities that we lost in that. We're losing out on research that could be happening, like you said, with psychedelics. 50, 60 years, what would have happened if this could have happened, continued 50 years ago instead of getting stopped? How could that have potentially set us up for a much better place with all the wars that the U.S. has been involved in and all the veterans we're losing so many veterans every day to suicide. Also, the mental health crisis that we're in right now and the post-COVID era and all of those other things. We don't have these tools available that could be. And again, it doesn't mean that they're the right thing for everyone, but there is a loss of potential that we often don't see because we only think about, is there any kind of downside to that. So I appreciate you bringing that part out. But I don't think, walk us through how this is coercion, because I don't think most people think about laws as coercion. They think of it as the way we keep from chaos reigning in the world is through making a law about it. So if something's bad, let's make a law about it. If something is harmful to you, let's make a law about it. Because this is how we kind of keep civil society from imploding on itself, is we make laws about things that can be harmful. I heard, you've probably heard this like 30 years ago, but I just heard it like last week, that there's, every law comes at the end of a gun or something like that. There's a saying about this, like there's a gun at the end of every law.
Yeah, it's Chairman Mao, actually. He said every law is enforced at the barrel of a gun.
Okay, every law is enforced at the barrel of a gun. And I heard that and was like, what? And then I started thinking and thought, yeah, that's true. It's going to eventually come to that. Even if it's not a criminal law, if you rack up enough fees and fines, they're going to come looking for you. If you do, if you continue on down the path of enforcement, you eventually get to force. And
yes, it's right there in the word. Right there in the word. You just said it. Enforcement. It's right in the word.
So help us kind of wrap our minds around that. Like, how why is it not wise to use the law as sort of a means of messaging? Like, let's help people know healthy decisions to make. Let's make a law about it that will kind of communicate to them what we want them to do and what might be best for them. Help us unwind that, because I think we grew up kind of thinking of the law the same way, and the culture that you and I grew up in, of, it's sort of a messaging strategy. Sometimes it's for specifically because we want to say, don't do that, otherwise you're going to be punished. But a lot of time, the law was used as a way of teaching. It is this teaching tool to kind of teach people the sort of society that we want them to live in. I still hear that from a lot of people. The law helps us to teach. How would you respond to that?
Well, personally, I'm not speaking for the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity right now, or even the human respect philosophy, but just personally, I observed that Paul said that the law actually causes us to sin. It doesn't work and it causes us, right? So if the law was, the law is a great teacher. It does show us that we're sinners, but is it really something that makes us better? Do we become better people because we have more rules? Well, we know for a fact that's not true. We know that the more rules there are, the more likely they are to be violated. Harvey Silverglate, the great civil libertarian attorney, said that you're committing 3 felonies a day. And most people are stunned to learn that they're breaking so many laws, basically. That's the point that he's trying to make. And it's because there's so many of them. So the idea that they would become a teacher, I don't know if you ever read a warning label. I mean, they're really long. Like on the bottles now, you can actually peel back the thing and it gets longer and longer. And you need a magnifying glass to see the print. Does that help? Like, we keep putting more and more warnings out. We keep putting more and more information out. You go to sign up for software and you've got this long thing you have to agree to. How many people read that thing? Is it really helping? Are you safer because they put all those words down on the page? Did it help you in any way? When you end up misusing the software in some way, or the tool or the drug, can it simply be said, well, you were told, you were warned? I mean, in the spate of all of these things, there's no way you could really argue that we're better off. We're actually kind of worse off because there's so much. So we need fewer of them. But I also like how Stephen Carter, a law professor, explains this. He opens up at law school, very first class that these students are sitting in, and he says, who do you want to kill? Who do you want to destroy? Because every law ends up there. Now, here's how that works. If we make a law, we may believe that we did it for some virtuous and good reason, and it's because we were hoping people would just do the right thing after we made the law. But inevitably, some people don't. And so, okay, we're going to make some examples of those people. What are we going to do to them? Well, that's where force shows up. We're going to have people who are carrying weapons and kidnapping tools, pick them up, put them in a cage, right? That's what we're going to do next. But what happens if they think that what's happening to them is unfair and unjust at that moment? What happens if they have a bad mental health or emotional response to it at that moment? Well, they could get killed, and they do. And this happens over 1,000 times a year in this country. So every time that you say, well, we're going to make a law, what you're saying is, we don't care about that person's happiness anymore. We've just decided that our happiness matters more. They should do what we said. We don't care about their harmony anymore. We don't care if we get along with those people. We're going to destroy them if we have to. And anybody that has any familiarity with our criminal justice system and how it piles onto people and makes things worse has to begin to understand. And this is a completely different, rabbit trail I'm headed down here. So we probably don't want to go too far down it. But they have to understand that it makes it harder. Like, let's say you're poor and you're in the dock. You're charged with some crime. You had possession of a drug that you shouldn't have had. Well, now we're going to add to that some kind of criminal record to you, which is going to make it harder for you to get a job, which is going to increase your level of stress and poverty, which is going to make you more prone to want to go back and take the drug. So across the board, too many laws, eventually people get killed, bad things get done to them, but it might be as simple as we're driving the very activity we hoped to prevent.
Yeah, especially with substance use. To me, that's one of the things that got me really passionate about it. Is it feels like we are actually, it doesn't just feel like this is true, but we are using the tools to solve a problem that make that problem worse. Mm-hmm. We're using trauma and force and long-term pain to try to address a problem that is made worse by trauma and long-term pain and having your voice taken away, all of these things that people have experienced in traumatic circumstances in their lives, we're adding on more of those. And then we're kind of saying, gosh, why doesn't this work? I guess we should do more of it. I guess we should put them in jail for 20 years instead of 10 years. I guess we should, it just doesn't lead back to the thing that we wanted to. And I am still there's so much about kind of what you're talking about that I'm like percolating on, it's like, I can see it. And yet it's so hard to let go of that fear of like, but I want control over what people do. I want, and I feel that personally. I think that's the world that we've grown up in. And that still is, I'm kind of a control freak myself. So I like the thought that I can have some control over someone. And yet, even a law is at its best for people, it is a message. Now, it's a message that's enforced, but it is, you can't force someone not to use a drug. Even let's say you put them in prison, they can still get drugs in prison. I mean, it's humbling. It should be humbling to us to realize that even the things we think we can force people to do, you cannot force anyone to think the way you want them to. You can't force them to change their mind on anything that you believe they should think differently about. People find a way to do the things that they want to do. And there are lots of other ways that we can, smoking is always one of my favorite examples. There are lots of other ways that we can incentivize people not to smoke, that we can educate them, we can give them better insurance rates, we can, businesses can choose not to allow smoking in it anymore. It makes it less, just harder to do. We've significantly reduced smoking by influence and education and incentives rather than by, saying, well, let's get the police on it and arrest everybody who's smoking and ban the market and arrest all the traffickers who are selling cigarettes now. And we don't do that. We haven't taken that approach. So what do you think is, specifically around substance use? Spend a little more time connecting that to substance use for us. Like, what do you think is if the world was as you wanted it to be, how would we approach substance use and substances, drugs, and people who use them? What would that look like in the real world of, this candy aisle, heroin, and we just let anyone have it? Like, what is your world look like?
By the way, that's not so far-fetched. At the turn of the previous century, it was possible, 1900, it was possible for a child to go to the pharmacy at the assignment of his mother to pick up heroin. That was over the shelf, over the counter. There was no prescription system at that point. The pharmacists did have control of it, right? They weren't like putting it out, next to the register or whatever, right? But it was something that the pharmacist could measure out and send home to a housewife who had sent her child to the store to get it. And no one would have batted an eye that this had happened. And it wasn't really forbidden fruit either. Like, it didn't have that allure like, oh, well, on the way home, I'm going to go to the playground and sell some of this to my friends. Like, that didn't happen either. There wasn't a youth drug dealing movement in place. Why, if it was so readily available, were the other factors that seemed to cause us so much trouble over the last 70 years? Why was that not a problem back then? In any way, the same degree. Why weren't there drive-by shootings? There's just a host of things to kind of ask about, like, why was that possible for that to work? But let's go from the other end. Let's assume that someone in our lives has this issue. And I want to ask you a question from your expertise in your work. And I kind of am anticipating the answer because I read Curious, your excellent book. Do you think most people understand addiction when it hits their families and their friends? Like, in a helpful, constructive way?
No, I mean, not out of the gate. I think they end up going, whoa, what? But they start rethinking it quickly.
Okay, because it is happening to someone close to them, so they don't want necessarily their family member going to jail. I take what you're saying there. But like, if you understood that there's a trauma at work here that may have led to this situation. And there's a term you use in the book that talks about how these traumas are stacked in a way, especially at an early age. I forget what that term is.
Yeah.
But when someone's dealing with that trauma, what is the best, most constructive way to help them out of that trauma? If it turned out that sending them to prison was the best way to do this, then we should have solved the problem a long time ago. If stiffer sentencing was the best way to solve this, we should have put a major, major dent in this problem. The price of drugs shouldn't have gone up. And we shouldn't have the President of the United States talking about attacking other countries right now, like invading inside their space, their sovereign space. This is so risky. This is so dangerous. Invading their sovereign space to take out cartels. How did those cartels come to exist? We're not talking about bombing GE or Apple, right? These are big corporations. They managed to work within the system. How did these criminal cartels come to exist? And why are we at a level right now where we're talking about risking war, where we're talking about using the tools of war to deal with this problem? If we understood that people had trauma, then what would happen? Just like that Habitat for Humanity example I shared earlier, people would roll up their sleeves and they would learn how to move into these situations. And it would be part of the things that we know how to do. Now, there's so many social problems. You're not going to know how to solve all of them, but you would know who it was in your life, because there would be somebody who knows exactly how to deal with those situations. And then they could move and step in and participate in a role. And again, our social muscles would increase. We would get better at dealing with these issues because there would be so many of us. You probably have heard the term crowdsourcing, right? There's this idea that if there's a problem, a lot of people can swarm on top of it, and they can do so voluntarily. And in that, knowledge will emerge that's really dynamic and special and great. And that's what we would be like as a society. When we say we're going to let the government handle this, what we're saying is we're not going to exercise our social muscles at all. We're not going to do anything that's going to be compassionate at all. We're going to assume that that's what deals with the problem. And then we're going to go back to watching television or doing whatever else is we do. We won't get any stronger. Our community won't get any stronger. And the people that we claim to care about won't get healed.
Talk about the fish and water problem of people are living in the world. They're not even aware that these principles are at play around them. Maybe, in my experience, they haven't thought deeply about drug policy or why people do the things they do or why the approach hasn't worked and why we keep doing the same thing even though it hasn't worked over 50 years. What is that? Like, how do you help people begin to see the unseen principles that are happening around them? Are they even open to? Do they want to see those?
I don't know the answer to that question. We're still trying to figure out whether that's true. But in terms of connecting this, I want to go back to gravity. So we talked about a principle. It's the principle of human respect. The natural principle of human respect says that any time you use coercion, theft, or violence, happiness, harmony, and prosperity decline always. It's an absolute rule like gravity. Okay. So gravity is something we figure out pretty early in life. You don't need a book for it. Everybody knows what gravity is. And in fact, we use that example so often because everybody can identify with it. And the reason that they can is that from a very early age, there was an immediate connection between cause and effect. It was so super obvious to everyone that it existed. So everybody understands that they're not going to walk off the 20th story of a building without a plan. Because if they do, they're going to go splat when they hit the ground. Everybody inherently gets that. But it turns out that if we didn't have gravity in our lives, the world would be a chaotic place. It would. So first, if you got turned off for a split second, lots of things would break instantly. Like the whole world there'd be a massive amount of death just in a second. But its presence, learning and understanding how that principle actually works. There's a formula. Newton figured out how fast the object falls. And the understanding of that formula allows us to build bridges. It allows us to build buildings. It has a whole array of other scientific and engineering impacts. So if you understand that thing at some depth, and it doesn't take much, the formula is actually pretty simple. If you understand it at some depth, you begin to understand how it works in your world and you can apply it in places. Now, I learned the philosophy of human respect from a gentleman named Chris. And Chris is a very successful businessman with one of the largest plants in his industry in the world. And when I went to tour that plant 4 times within the first half of that tour, I found that he was using gravity. It was one of the principles he'd collected along the way to save energy and reduce costs. And he was doing something in his process that nobody else in the industry did until him. Now, there's one competitor, as I understand it, out there that's now adopted this same practice. But this practice ended up being a huge leverage process that differentiated him from everyone else in the industry and reduced his energy costs at the same time. And it was because he located and discovered a principle. So let me suggest that in every area of your life, the more that you can be in harmony with the circumstances around you, the people around you, the nature of the world that's around you, the more you can increase that harmony, the less friction you'll have in your life, the less pain, the less distress, the less expense, the less energy expenditure, it all goes down. That means your life is more profitable and able to flourish. So when you find a principle, when you find a cause and effect relationship, whether it's in nature or society, when you find this and you practice it, your life will be better. You will be happier. You will have greater prosperity. You will have more harmony within your relationships. So once you get exposed to this idea, our hope is, and I love the comparison you make of fish not knowing they're wet. Once you're aware of kind of the wetness of everything around you, what can you do with that? What will you explore and make better as a result of it? It's our hope that once people are aware of this, they'll, number one, make a commitment. This is my moral commitment. I now recognize that this principle is in effect at all times. There's a natural principle of human respect at work. And because of that, I will not violate that. I won't do anything that's going to increase theft, violence, coercion. I'm not going to participate in those activities at all. But maybe one step further, you're going to roll up your sleeves and find a place where you can help. Every time we go to the government, the first step we have to do is we have to convince a group of people to work with us. Instead of expending that energy on politicians who don't understand and don't care about the problem and only care about getting elected anyway, that's their number one care. Going to people who actually say they do care and who are ready to work, whether that's donate money or share some of their time or expertise, whether it's any one of those things and some combination thereof. Going to those people allows us to build our social muscles and make the world a better place. And basically, whatever the social problem you're looking at, create the equivalent of flying cars.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about persuasion, because it's such a big part of what End It for Good does, is like this, our deep belief that we don't own people's minds. And so we can't force them to think whatever we want them to think. We can't force them to agree with us on drug policy or on the changes that need to be made. And so that was how those early discussions happened, was bringing people in a room and allowing people to say what they really thought. And there was no kind of shame for what they thought. There was no telling everyone they're wrong, even if we disagree. And people have consistently said this is kind of like this magical experience when they come to an End It for Good event. And it is because of that. So as you've been talking, I've just been thinking about, it's interesting how much of our time and energy we spend trying to control other people. So I think about that myself as someone who's kind of a control freak, and I'm a parent. So I have 3 small people who, you know, on the one hand, I go, I want them to be free and make their own decisions. On the other hand, I think I want to control all of their decisions, and I want them to make the decisions I want them to make. And yet, you know, I've got teenagers now, so I recognize I can't control their decisions. They are their own people, and they will make their own decisions. So I have been thinking about how much time and energy we spend trying to control other people. And that's all of our focus on the government and what's happening in Washington is, you know, this intense desire to control and make sure the other side doesn't get what they want, and make sure that we get what we want, and everyone is kind of forced to take our path. And so that's an interesting thing that I've been thinking about, is just, I think if we sit back, and I say this as someone who's still on this kind of learning journey with, as your student on this principle, because if it is a principle, as you say, that exists in the world and is just there, whether or not we recognize it, then it is to all of our benefit to think about that, because it's in the same way that we would think this is really silly not to believe in gravity. It's at work whether or not you believe it is. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying this is a principle of the world of humans. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. It just is how the world is. It is how people are, this principle of human respect. So that is something I think to think about and begin to think about how much of our time we spend trying to control other people. Almost the entirety of our drug policy is spent trying to control people's choices around substance use. Really, what I say is, what End It for Good is advocating for is to give adults a broader range of choices around their substance use. That's it, really. We already let adults use drugs, prescription drugs, recreational drugs, alcohol, tobacco, opioids. We already let adults have some form of choice around substances that they use. We just have chosen some substances that we say you cannot have that choice legally, and we push that into the underground market. So really, that is the kind of the move. It doesn't sound very radical when you say it that way. Is we're just expanding the number of choices and bringing those markets legal again, having some regulations around not selling to children and that sort of thing. And we may disagree on that, and that's totally okay. But it's not as crazy as we think it sounds when we think about what the kind of the proactive side of that is. Instead of we've been fighting to try to force people not to make this choice, and we failed miserably. We've got twice as many people using illicit drugs today as we did 20 years ago. It's not working.
I want to personalize this on one more level, and that is there are people who actually fall and do get hurt as a result of these substances being available in their lives. They seem to have some kind of control or issue. That's obvious, and we can't ignore those people. But most of them quit or stop, and some of them have pretty dramatic stories to tell. And we call those testimonies. And one of the greatest blessings that we can possibly experience is hearing somebody come who's been in the darkest of places. They might actually be able to help somebody else avoid that dark place or come out of the dark place themselves because they have the credibility. We call it street cred, right? They've been through something so bad that only they can reach out, only they understand and can really help the people who are headed down or potentially headed down a wrong path. The truth of the matter is every single one of us has had to learn something the hard way. And I have yet to meet the human being who, in the midst of learning some of those lessons, hasn't at least once said out loud, oh, I am the person I am today because, and then they begin to recount the lesson that they learned the hardest way. And then they'll say something like this, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, why would we assume that everybody else would change a thing? Maybe the very existence of that person becomes their gift. I have somebody very close in my life who deals with a particular problem, who has been a minister to other people who've had that same problem. It's not addiction in this particular case, but it's their pain, it's their thorn in the flesh, that suffering that they've been able to take back and go share with somebody else. And so I believe even in those cases, there's redemption, there's community and social healing that's available. And those people serve a function and a purpose and should be allowed to serve a function and a purpose. They'd probably be more effective if they could go openly talk and the people who needed them the most could raise their hand and say, I'm one of those people that has that problem, because neither legal barriers nor shame is being imposed in that moment.
Yeah. I often say for people who just want to reduce the stigma of substance use, the stigma of addiction, in my mind, I think that's impossible until you stop labeling people as criminals who are struggling with it. You just cannot.
Exactly.
You are not going to be able to address stigma in a meaningful way while you're still saying, but they are a criminal. Let's just sort of destigmatize criminality. Nobody wants to destigmatize criminality. We don't want people hurting other people. We don't want people committing crimes. To your point of, then we should really think about what we're labeling as crimes, because it matters whether or not we have a respect for that term, whether we have a respect for the law, whether we take laws seriously. So it is clear, just based on the principle of human respect, that persuasion would be a really important part of the work that you guys do. You don't want to force your views on other people. You want to persuade them of this. Why do you think that is such an important tool? Why is it more effective to persuade someone than it is to try to just force them?
Well, some of what we're arguing here are economic arguments, essentially, right? And in economics,
On drug policy.
Yeah, I mean, but even across the board, just as a philosophy, like as we're looking at the law, we're looking at it in a more economical way. So you want to maximize flourishing. One of the things that you're going to do anytime you're taking on any kind of task is figure out how to reduce your costs. And there are real costs that come with this. You want to be as efficient as possible. There's real inefficiencies that come with this prohibition scheme. So what I have to do in every case, persuasion is never optional. It's never optional. Like if you want to change something, you could go the political route, but it means you have to persuade a group of politicians who aren't personally vested in your concern, whose number one goal is to get reelected, to do what you want them to do. By the way, they won't. They're only going to do part of what you wanted them to do. And they're going to do that part expensively and badly. And they're probably going to cause side effects in the process. And everybody, says, oh, we didn't see that coming. We needed to, if they'd have done the policy my way, as if I were the king or I were the dictator, then it would have worked. And that's always the argument that everybody falls back to. But if you took all that expense, all that inefficient allocation of energy, and you diverted it instead to going into the community and actually helping people, well, guess what? You can start helping an addict right now. You can start helping a homeless person right now. You pick your social problem, whatever it is, litter. It doesn't matter what it is. You can begin solving it right now, all by yourself. And there's ministries and nonprofit organizations out there that are tackling a lot of these things. There's even in some cases, depending on the problem we're discussing, businesses that have a profit-based model that are addressing the problem. The government puts those businesses out of business all the time. They come in and compete with them with their regulation and make the need for the solution, which would have involved people having jobs and opportunity. They take that thing out of the equation. I'm suggesting to you it's far, far more efficient. The persuasion is not optional. It always has to be done. But why not start actually solving the problem as opposed to convincing a bunch of people that they got to force someone else to adopt their solution, which never, ever happens anyway. You never get what you want. You're not the dictator. You're not the king.
One of the things that I've thought about is even if you get so this is the world that we live in, that there's policies that we are under in the U.S. because that's just how the U.S. government works currently. But to your point, a second ago, you mentioned about people, we made this policy and we just didn't realize who it was going to harm down the line. Early on when I was doing this work, I just started thinking about like who is paying the highest price for me not having to see a certain drug on the shelf at the pharmacy. Like because that's what this is about. It's so that I can't get heroin, let's say, at the local pharmacy. Mm-hmm. So in order to stop me from having that choice and to stop me, what is happening? And the more I learned, the more I thought what's happening is that there's a woman just like me south of our border who's being terrorized, eventually killed by forced either, you can come work for us or we're going to kill you from cartels. That the empowerment of that kind of behavior and the very real world murder that is happening because of that to people just like me who are just happen to be living in another country. That's the cost of that. There's all of these costs, so many of these overdoses every year. They are the cost of what it means to keep a drug out of a legally regulated market and pushed into a contaminated market where they're getting fentanyl and they're getting who knows whatever else. Those are the real world costs. This is not about, did we tell Christina we did or did not want her using a drug? This is about who is paying the price so that Christina doesn't have that choice at the pharmacy, even though, for what people tell me, I could get heroin anywhere that I wanted, anywhere in this country. We haven't kept heroin out of people's hands, but we have kept it out of visibility. So we got to understand that too. It's not that we have made heroin disappear.
That's a good point.
It's just not visible.
It's just not visible.
To keep people from seeing it visibly, the price we're paying is 100,000 overdose deaths a year, massive amounts of crime that are destabilizing whole countries, massive amounts of people who are vulnerable, who are being put in jail, in prison,
Yep.
families destabilized, dads taken out of homes. It doesn't matter if you think that dad would have been the most epic dad ever, whether or not he was using a drug. He's not going to have the opportunity now that he's sitting in prison for 10, 20, 30 years. Like, that's the real world cost of Christina not having to see heroin at the pharmacy. That is the trade-off that we're making. We don't see that. Like, a lot of us we are shielded from that cost. We don't want to see it. It's very painful to see it. We don't have to see the bodies hanging off of bridges like people do in other parts of the world where cartels run whole areas of a country. That's the real world cost. To make my life more pleasant for me, supposedly to make my life more pleasant for me, it actually makes my life much worse. And not just my life, it makes lots of other people's lives worse in an attempt to make my life better. And that is just a terrible, heartbreaking reality to me. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Got me going there for a minute.
That's okay.
Yeah. What do you want to leave us with, Jim, as we wrap up? I think this has given people a lot to think about. Bring it home for us and help us to kind of bring it down from this big picture idea to like the real world. Like, is this not just something philosophical people like to sit around and talk about, but does it actually impact me? Would it actually impact my world? Can I actually impact the world around me if I adopt this way of thinking, if I believe in and live out this principle that Jim and company thinks is true?
So I would suggest humbly that to the degree that you practice this principle, that you don't use coercion, threats, theft, and violence, to the degree that you don't do those things, don't try to control other people, you will increase your happiness, believe it or not. Your happiness will go up. And part of the reason it will happen is that the happiness of people around you will go up. And there will be more harmony around you as that happens. And then as people are more and more free and they're able to pursue, they're going to learn lessons, and they're going to learn some of them the hard way. But most people, most of the time, are actually going to use those energies to create and to do better things. They're going to learn how to do better things together. And new synergies and new opportunities are going to happen. And all of this is within your reach now. Like, you don't have to wait until Congress acts or your mayor does the right thing. You don't have to expect the police to enforce the law the way you would have. You don't have to lobby and do any of that stuff. You can begin to make a difference right now. I would suggest that everyone should take the thing that they care about the most and they figure out, as you have, how to invest themselves into changing that, really understanding the nature of that problem. Because you've gone through this experience that you describe in your book, Curious, where you learned the things that you're sharing with us today. You went through a relational process that took you down all these roads and you learned these lessons. You weren't taught them before. That's true of almost every issue out there. That if you begin to dig into it, you find out that the stories are just so. They really aren't the reality of what's happening here. And if you actually got on the ground and you met the people who are working on that problem, the solutions that they would share with you would be radically different from the ones that are being suggested by the people in the political establishment, for example, which tend to dominate our media cycle. Because, the conflict's kind of attractive and fun. If you're at a concert right now, and you just paid, a lot to go see Taylor Swift or whoever, and you're sitting there, you may have been looking forward to that for months, and you may have spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to be there at that moment. But if a fight broke out in the other section adjacent to you, you would be distracted and watch the fight. It's human nature to go do this. This lure of the conflict machine is with us all the time. And in the process of it, they constantly propose things that will keep us at each other's throats. And I'm suggesting to you that if you get to know the people who are in the trenches, on the ground, working with the people who have real compassion for real people that they can name by name, you will learn that the situation is radically different than what you've been told in the media. And you'll find out that there's actual solutions out there that aren't being fully embraced in practice, and there'll be an immediate place for you to contribute. And that's where I would recommend people start.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jim. Let us know, where can people get more information about the foundation, about the work that you're doing? How can they connect if this is interesting and they want to dive in a little deeper?
I talk about some of these things. This is it keeps weaving its way into my podcast, which is called Gracearchy with Jim Babka. And you, as you said, were a guest on the show. We did 3 episodes with you. I would like to think we had the most thorough set of interviews you've experienced yet.
You
and
do.
We really went deeply in your book. And so these themes keep coming up there consistently. And then I work at the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity, where we're attempting to advance these ideas. And you can look for them on Google, but it's harmonyandprosperity.org. And right now, there's not a lot of information. We're putting more information up later this year. We'll be adding to our curriculum, as it were. But we are out there exploring these ideas and helping people understand them kind of more right now on a one-on-one basis and in opportunities like the one that you gave me here today. And I appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim. As you were talking, I was thinking, if we all think about the person we like talking to the most about things that we kind of feel vulnerable about, the deepest parts of our life, the things we're struggling with, all of us think about people that we think aren't going to judge us and aren't going to try to control us. Nobody is going to the person who they're like, oh man, as soon as I tell them that, they're going to have a 3-point plan that I'm going to have to follow, and they're going to be checking up on me, and they're going to be telling me I'm doing everything wrong. And why is that? Because we have this innate understanding that that's not who we want to talk to about those things. We want to come to somebody who's going to let us be ourselves, who's still going to give us the choice, who's still going to, they might try to influence us. And that to me is one of the beautiful things about this, because I really believe in influence, like that it is, we can advance really good things and bad things. But that influence is a beautiful thing to figure out how to build trust, how to be a trustworthy voice for someone that they're going to say, you know what, I'm willing to listen. You can't force yourself to be someone people are willing to listen to, but you can make yourself a trustworthy voice. You can work on yourself and become the kind of person that people are willing to confide in and they want to work with to solve society's problems. And I was thinking about that as you were talking, that if we even take it down to the personal level, who are you going to go try to solve problems with? Is it somebody who's going to, try to control you immediately? No, it's somebody that you're going to feel like is going to kind of be that sounding board, and which is why
Amen.
I love a good therapist too. They're not there to say, oh, let me come in and fix everything.
Yep.
We all love that friend who is willing to listen, willing to offer thoughts maybe, but is ultimately going to walk with us on the journey and whatever highs and lows that journey takes, and the lessons we learn and how we can share that with other people. And so you've gotten me thinking a lot. So encourage people to go to harmonyandprosperity.org and join me on the learning journey. We're always inviting people on the learning journey with End It for Good on drug policy. I'm on Jim's learning journey on this foundation principle of human respect, and very curious about this as I come from such a different way of thinking about behavior and how we use the law, and yet have seen in a lot of ways how this has played out, and does seem to be a really unique kind of principle that's at work, maybe whether we realize it or not. So I'm going to continue on my learning journey. Invite you to join that. Go join Jim on his podcast at Gracearchy. And Jim, thanks so much for joining us on the End It for Good podcast today.
My pleasure.
Go ahead and head over to enditforgood.com, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. We send out podcast episodes on there. I send out commentary on various things happening in the world every 2 weeks. And it's just our main point of contact to let you know what's happening with this movement. So we'd love to have you over there and join us on social media. You can find us there at End It for Good MS. We'll see you next time on the End It for Good podcast.
So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.